Welcome everyone to Therapy for Nerds. These are your hosts. I am Cassidy Russell.
And I'm Abbey Ronquillo, and this is
Busse.
And today our topic is video games and productivity. And Katie, how about you start us off?
Absolutely. So this is a topic I feel like is pretty near and dear to my own heart because I am someone who really does enjoy playing video games, but I have a little, I guess we could say, a cognitive dissonance that comes up with it when it comes to productivity. I see the benefit of it, right? Like I can see how a lot of people can use it for coping skills, reducing stress, connecting with friends. But then I feel like myself and maybe, somewhat in our society, we have this idea of like, it's also kind of lazy and it's not very productive. And so for me, I think it's been interesting kind of hearing how that's been different for people. And I'd be interested to hear like with each of you, like, how do you view it? Do you have that kind of similar cognitive dissonance at times?
I mean, I can definitely talk to this a lot. I definitely have, I definitely view video games as a coping skill. That's something that I feel very strongly about, and something that I believe very strongly in is video games can be a coping skill. I also think with every coping skill, there's the skill of timing has to come into effect. Like, if we're going around doing video games all the time, then it becomes a maladaptive coping skill. And it's definitely been a maladaptive coping skill for myself. Even earlier this year, I was really struggling with my own mental health, and I just played Stardew Valley for hours. I don't even want to say how many hours logged in Stardew Valley. And I mean, at the beginning of the pandemic with Animal Crossing, I also logged a lot of hours in that. And it definitely, it did cross a point where it was probably a little too much. At the same time, it can be a very powerful coping skill when we're utilizing it correctly and utilizing it in the way that it quote unquote should be used, and making sure that our timing is really really strong. Like when I was in high school and played a lot of video games, like more so than I play now. I definitely played a lot more before college. And one of my rules that growing up was always instilled with me was to only play after I finished all my homework. And so I had like that timing instilled with me, and so I felt like it could be, I feel like that's the main difference between a maladaptive coping skill and a positive coping skill, is when you're timing the use of that skill correctly.
Because it's very easy to overcope with it, like to overuse it and have it become maladaptive. And even it sounds like that kind of escapism, avoidism that comes with it at times. And I think that's totally fair, is like it can be positive, and that could also be some of those pieces that come with that idea of like, well, it's not productive because it can be overused at times.
yeah, definitely. And I think like depending on there's so many different variations of video games nowadays. Even games that are meant to be educational or games that are meant to help be physical, like or help with exercise and things like that. So, along with coping skills or being there to support us mentally, they help us with a lot of different other things. And I like that you brought up the idea of maladaptive, being maladaptive, because I completely forgot about the idea that it could also be a negative thing too. But I think that goes along the lines of anything, right? Too much of anything is kind of could be bad for us. But 100%, I think that as technology continues to evolve and as video games get more, what's the word? It's more, I don't know, that word that starts with an S.
On it.
Um, Sophisticated.
Ah.
That we grow as people, and the video games are growing more, and they are more beneficial to us the more we can do with them.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I definitely think that was an important distinction to be able to make in this conversation early on, is the idea that as with so many other ways that people cope, it can be overused, it can be maladaptive. And I think that's important to be aware of. I think it's important to get support if that is the case, and to just honestly notice when we're doing it, because we all have those moments where we're like, oh, that was like 6 hours. That was supposed to be like a half hour. And we have to have that, like, you know, self-awareness in those moments, and also understanding, obviously, we're doing it for a reason. It serves some purpose in our lives. But I think what's really important, and I want to really focus our conversation today on, is the idea of it in a very healthy use, like the use of it as a coping that is appropriate, that isn't excessive, and that can be really beneficial. And I know we've talked about games before and how they've brought people through the pandemic, really, like how people have been able to utilize that to stay connected and have that source of enjoyment. And I think it's really important to look at those pieces, you know, look at how it has been like productive in a way, because I don't know, like there's, like I had said, is like the idea of taking breaks, right? And how breaks are really important, but how often do we take a break and we're like, well, I'm gonna go play a game, and it's like, this could be a more productive break though. Like I could be reading that book that's been on my to-do list for a while. And like I had said for myself, is I notice when I'm doing that and I sit down, I'm playing a game, and I'm like, you should be doing something else. And I'm wondering for each of you, like, how do you work with that when you have those thoughts of like, I should do something else, even though you're really enjoying playing the game?
That's a real struggle because that's like, I think that's the main reason why I don't play as many games as I did in high school, is because there's this adult notion of, like, quote unquote adult notion that I should be doing something else. I should be cleaning the dishes. I should be making dinner. I should be making a new Instagram post for something. Like, I should be working on something.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that's, making sure that I'm building my career or making sure my house is nice, like, there's always that you could be doing more. And it's definitely been the struggle the older I get. And it's definitely, I try to give myself like times where, okay, it's nighttime, you're tired, this will be, you can play off, Breath of the Wild until it's time to go to bed. And that's like, I've kind of set aside specific hours of my day, typically towards the end of the day, to start playing so that I don't get too wrapped up with it during the middle of the day and not want to put it down. And then I've been trying to, when my clients have this sort of mindset with them, I try to remind them that, like, hey, it can be a coping skill. Just make sure that you're doing the coping skill mindfully. And
Mm-hmm.
if you bring awareness to the fact that this is your recharge, then you can actually allow it to be your recharge instead of this, because it can be more of a drain if you don't allow it to be a recharge. If you allow yourself, if you focus on the I could be more productive, then it's a drain. But if you're focusing on allowing yourself to be recharged by it, then it's a recharge. I don't know, Abby, what do you think?
No, yeah, that